Because?
Why the hell not? So, we have done some reading.
Yeah,
in the
big
meantime.
one.
A big one. So we have Alexandre Dumas' The Count of Monte Cristo. We have Somerset Maugham's somewhat autobiographical, but not quite. It's more like a literary biography. What'd you call it?
Autobiography?
Yeah, some sort of literary exercise here. From Somerset Maugham, published in 1938 when he was about 64 years old. And then finally we have a collection of weird stories, weird fiction that kind of explore 19th century anxieties around technology. And there's a lot of supernatural elements in this. And this is actually from the British Library collection, which
called The Night Wire and Other Tales of Weird Media, edited by Aaron Worth.
Yes. So we'll be taking up each one in turn.
All right.
So let's start. Should we start with the big one, or?
Let's start with the big one.
Okay.
So the famous, beloved, first time ever reading Alexandre Dumas, The Count of Monte Cristo.
Have you read The Three Musketeers?
Yeah.
No.
I know, it's so sad.
Yeah.
Oh, I not read them.
It's one of those ones where you like watch like a million of the movies and like adaptations, and then you just never get around to watching it.
Yeah.
I feel like the same thing happens with me with Don Quixote. It's like it's one of those ones that you hear so much about it that you just sometimes don't feel the need to read it in its original. I think that's excusable. I think it's fine. There's so many books out there, and some of them are worth just having the Coles notes because references to it are like
perhaps, but that's completely unrelatable to this because this was definitely worth reading.
Yeah, exciting.
I love it. I love this book. Exciting. It was so fun. I can't believe how much I loved it.
I can't believe how much you loved it.
I love this one. Like, now it's like one of my faves.
Yeah, you were really so with Ava. She's either like
picky.
She's very picky, but like she either loves a book and she like consumes it and completely like finishes it in like one sitting or two sittings, or like it takes you real like it's like pulling teeth. It really takes you a while to get into something. But this one, it's an adventure story. It's a romance. It's action. It's drama. It's historical piece.
Check.
There's elements of like creepiness. Yeah.
Like psychological,
thriller.
because you want to know what the heck he's going to do next.
Yeah.
So it takes like it's like just one, it almost feels like 5 books in one. Right?
Yeah.
Like a trilogy. I feel like it could have been a set.
Yeah.
But.
So tell us a bit about the book. Actually, before we do that, let's do a little biographical note on Monsieur Dumas. So he was born in 1802 at Villers-Cotterêts. His father was an illegitimate son of a marquis and was a general in the Revolutionary armies, but his father died when he was only 4. He was brought up in straitened circumstances and received very little education. His most successful novels are, of course, this one, The Count of Monte Cristo, which appeared during 1844 to 1845, and The Three Musketeers, which was published in 1844 as well.
And we reviewed The Black Tulip, so if you ever want to go back to that one.
Oh, good memory.
That's did that one.
Yeah. And so he died in 1870.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think everyone's pretty familiar with the plot, and it's way too much to go into all of it, but I'll do a quick refresher for those who maybe haven't read it or read it a long time ago. So main character is Dante. For a second I forgot his name. Dante, and he's about to marry as a young captain, about to be promoted to captain of a ship, and that's really a good promising job for him at a young age, and he's about to marry the love of his life, Mercedes, and then basically on his wedding night he gets framed for being a Bonapartist by a jealous cousin. By a jealous cousin of Mercedes who is in love with her. But it's not just him. It was this like kind of plot by three gentlemen together who made it happen. And although the cousin is the one who set forth the letter accusing him of this, it was really the brains behind it were another gentleman and his companion. So basically, this young man goes to prison, and not only is it, not only he goes to prison, but he goes to one of the highest security level prisons on an island, and then he gets sent to isolation. And during that time, he meets an abbe who essentially he only meets him by them. The abbe actually slowly over years doing a tunnel, digging a tunnel.
Abbe Faria, right?
Faria, good memory. Tunnel, and he ends up hearing him in the night and giving him almost like a rebirth or re-life, because he was slowly going insane. Like if he had left it any more time, he would have really gone insane. So eventually they end up digging tunnels to one another and meeting, and the abbe is incredibly brilliant and knows multiple languages, has read so many novels, and he just passes his wisdom on to Dante. So eventually, elaborate plot, he escapes after the abbe dies, and ends up reclaiming a treasure that the abbe had left on an island of Monte Cristo. And so he ends up becoming one of the most wealthy men in all of Europe, and enters into the Parisian society under the title of the Count of Monte Cristo. And his whole real reason for living wasn't just to live with pleasures that he missed inside of the prison, but was mostly for vengeance of the people that he lost, the people who framed him. Is basically vengeance on that, including Mercedes, who he finds out ended up marrying the cousin, so he feels deceived on multiple levels. He had the hope that she would still be alive, and she was alive and honored the marriage, and was still waiting for him. And he was so disheartened and angry when he found out she did not and married the cousin. So he had this very elaborate plot to basically not just it was quite elaborate and quite deceptive, the way he planned his vengeance on each of the people who betrayed him. But what I loved about the book was that he almost always, with all of his plots, he allowed ample time for most of the people to redeem themselves or prove to him that they weren't worthy of the punishment he had planned. But in some of them, his plan goes through, and he realizes as he follows through with his plots that, how did you phrase it? It ends up the people around
collateral,
the collateral damage. So he thought that in his mind, in the book, it seems that his vengeance would just go upon that person who he was so rightfully angry at, but it ends up not only harming innocent people around sometimes, it changes his soul in a way when he successfully completes some of the plots. Sometimes he felt redeemed by it, and then other times he felt incredibly guilty for the collateral.
It's interesting because it's kind of reminds me of that quote, and I have no idea where it's from. Maybe you will be able to let me know in the comment section. But it's revenge is a dish best served cold.
Yes.
And it just seems like that kind of is the attitude, the maxim that he kind of takes throughout the entire novel. He's very, let's talk a little bit about his physiognomy.
Yes. So the only reason why he got away with it really was because his I don't know why I'm trying to use the word his visual appearance it changed dramatically while he was in prison, because he was, I forgot to mention, he was in prison for 30 years.
Was it 30?
30 years or something. So he comes out of 40 something, okay, maybe it wasn't quite 30.
Or 20 or something like that.
He was it
was a considerable amount of time.
Yeah, it was 20 years, I think.
Yeah.
He was in prison, so his no one could recognize him except for Mercedes. So she's the only one who his guys didn't fool. But everyone else, they had no idea who he was, so he could go along with his.
But the way, we read it together, but Ava started this earlier than I did. I already had, when I was 17, 18, I read this one. But of course, it was such a long time ago that I don't remember the particulars. But the way I later came in like 3/4 of the way through, and we finished it together. But the way you described it to me was very interesting, because like you described like a very gaunt, like almost like olive complexion, perhaps more oriental, almost like Persian look.
And
but
white, yeah, very, very pale.
Pale, but like also like very like gaunt, emaciated, with long black straight hair, and like this sense where he wouldn't even eat anything. He would host these elaborate, sumptuous dinners from like ingredients from all over the world, and he'd entertain and host, and yet he would just barely sip on his wine and like not touch a morsel.
Yeah, and whenever he was in the house of the person who he was plotting against, he would never eat or drink. But I think his like stomach was also just impaired, and he also was not gluttonous after being in prison in that way. Oddly enough, and I find this so true to human nature too, which I really liked. It was like this kind of hypocrisy. It's like he could be so lavish in all of his like the houses he purchased, and he had this very oriental oriental type of decadence in all of his houses, which he had multiple. But yet his food, like he'd show everyone else decadence, and
it was very Spartan.
And him himself was very. So there was that kind of interesting contrast.
And I guess if we dig a little deeper in that, I guess in a way it could be read or interpreted in such a way that like the only thing that will satisfy his hunger and his desires is not food, but vengeance, right? Like it's almost like he would have died. In fact, perhaps it could be argued that he did die, but the only thing that sustained him and kept him going throughout the entirety of the plot was a sense of vengeance.
Yeah, and in a way, like Mercedes even says that. She's like, my Dante is dead, but you need to keep living. Like, I will hold my Dante in my heart. He's no longer here, but I am proud of who you are, but you're not my Dante anymore. So that romance kind of like, it was still romantic in a way, but it was, she still did hold, she never forgot about Dante. She just, and he did die, and she wasn't wrong, in a way.
And it was like, there was something also, I suppose, rather, troubling, I guess. It's like, I suppose if you're looking for one of those, what are they called, like anti-heroes, or someone who's the main protagonist, but is in a sense a very dark character, understandably so, right? But quite a dark character where a lot of his machinations and a lot of his actions resulted in a lot of tragedy. And so at certain points, certain points throughout the novel, I'm like, this left quite an unsatisfying, like kind of aftertaste, where you're just like, I can't believe he allowed this to happen.
Right, you don't feel victorious on his behalf. At some points you're like, really, he's still gonna go that far? And the things he does to remind himself too, which is what I found interesting, is to remind himself of the wrong done. Because at some points he forgets. He starts to have a lot of empathy, or like see the cruelty in how he's approaching things. And then to give him that revigoration of purpose in his vengeance, he would go revisit, for example, like the site in which he went actually back to the prison to show that, to remind himself of what he went through, to give that power back to his vengefulness, which I felt was also quite creepy. Like, I don't know, that seemed anti-human in a way.
Sociopathic about that.
Right. It's like, but I guess otherwise he knew he would die.
Well, there was another instance that I remember that was quite like shocking, was the this one young woman in a household is being poisoned, and slowly poisoned, and I'm not going to reveal who ends up being the poisoner.
I revealed enough in the book already.
Well, regardless, but so Monte Cristo actually befriends Mercedes' son, and he was rather in love with. He was in love with this girl, wasn't he? It was him.
No, it wasn't him.
Oh,
it was
no,
the captain.
It was the captain. Sorry, it was the captain.
Captain's son.
Yeah. So he befriends this young captain, and he wants him to marry this young woman who's being poisoned. And so he gives her a sleeping draught, and he says, "You must trust me." And she says, "Of course I trust you," to Count of Monte Cristo. And she essentially, falls asleep into this a coma
Mm-hmm.
and is presumed dead. And he lets his young friend, for God knows how long, labor under the assumption that his one true love is dead. And he gives him so many different, there's so many different opportunities for him to disclose or secretly tell him, you know, like, this is hold on, you know, I have something, a surprise for you. But this young man kind of like falls into despair and he actually wants to commit suicide. He's so desperately in love with his deceased sort of like fiance. And it seems like he's testing him, and he is testing him. Monte Cristo is testing the young man.
Because it's almost like he wants everyone who he's either plotted vengeance against to go through what he went through, in a way to die, that their spirit become almost completely dead, so they can find the reason to live and God and the purpose of living.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
but it's almost it's like he's playing God, and that's that's honestly in a way the ending. It's like some people, you know, no person is meant to play God in that way, and it can be disastrous and also not. Like, he ended up pulling back, right, and finally revealing it, but his aim in his head was never to tell his friend. The friend had to believe and find a purpose to live without her, just like his life, like just like his story. And
it's so interesting because, like, in a sense, it's like he pulls all these strings and comes up with all these complex plans, right, to like manipulate things behind the scenes. But he wants ultimately that person to make a decision for themselves. He doesn't want to like necessarily have it so that all the circumstances make it so that that person has to make a certain decision, especially the ones he loves, and he wants them to really have a change of heart or to prove to him that they're authentic in how they feel, as opposed to, you know, just giving up easily about, you know, oh, she's dead now, okay, I guess I'll just move on with my life. He wants them to really be right at the threshold of, you know, passionately killing oneself, you know, for the sake of your lost loved one, before, like, right on the edge, before he will intervene and reveal something. So
well, including himself, right? It wasn't. It's not until he's either almost successfully killed or destroyed financially these people he wants vengeance against, then he'll reveal who he is.
Yeah.
And because otherwise, if he reveals it too soon, they won't have any sort of remorse for what they did. Is his plan as well. So he only reveals it when he knows they're suffering to a great extent. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Okay.
So what would you
read it?
Do you read it?
Yeah, I have to read it. Okay.
Super excited here.
It's such a good book. I didn't want it to end. I like literally. It's probably why this video is so delayed, because I read this much in like 2 weeks, and then I was like this for like a month almost.
So what would you give it out of 5?
I will give it a 4.92.
4.92, yeah. I would give it also. I think I'll give it a 5.
Yeah,
I think I'll give it a 5.
4.97. Okay.
Okay, all right. There's a 0.03 that you're just like, I'm not.
I just never give a 5.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's a rule.
I don't
Have
know.
we not given 5 in the past?
Okay, if I've given 5 in the past, then this is up to 5.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Moving on.
Moving on.
Okay, this is called The Summing Up, and it's one of our favorite authors, Somerset Maugham. Yes.
Oh yeah, supposed to do that.
Written in 1938, so we have this like nice vintage edition, I suppose. Delightful in appearance, yes, hardcover.
With the little gold pages.
Yeah.
And the little, I love when they have these things on them.
The little bookmarks, the ribbons.
Yeah, the ribbons.
So this one is, it's not easy to love. So pretty much.
It's not really an autobiography.
It's not an autobiography because you get literally nothing of his personal life.
Even though his personal life sounds so freaking juicy, okay.
It's so exciting.
Like, okay, let's leave something. But
so, well, for one, let's say, like, he was
in the Secret Service.
He was in the Secret Service during World War One. He was a spy.
Okay, like, holy, could talk so much from that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He had a very secret second life as a homosexual.
Yep.
He was.
Tell juicy details about that. I mean, he alludes to it sometimes, but not really.
He's very coy.
Very coy.
Yeah.
not vulnerable in this book at all.
No. He doesn't speak much about his family life as a child. He speaks a little bit about
losing
his mother.
His parents at like 8 and 10.
There's something.
That's also crazy. Yeah, he loses both his mom and dad at 8 and 10.
So really a good portion at the beginning. It's kind of rocky to start with. A lot of it is his sort of literary heroes. He talks about sort of writers that he admires, poets that he admires. He then goes on to his kind of career. He talks a bit about how he was in the medical profession, right? And then he talks about how he wrote like 30 different plays. He was a dramatist, and actually quite a successful dramatist. Like he, at one point on the West End in London, he had like a few shows going at the same time. Like he was quite so.
Like almost more. That was his first like fame, I think, was in theater, right? Because
he always called himself a second-rate writer, and I understand why. And it's not just a sense of like humility. It's not a sense of humility.
Which is what I thought for a long time.
We thought so. Yeah, we thought he was just being modest, right? But the idea is that like he's excellent at dialogue. He's excellent at capturing the feel of a character. So he's a great character study.
Yeah.
Obviously, as a dramatist, you want to be able to convey as forcefully a character's personality with as little like dialogue necessarily as possible, right? You want to be able to be very succinct. That's how he kind of writes his characters, and he's able to like diversify his style, different sort of writing styles, different contact. Like he's excellent. Like I remember The Magician with Oliver Haddo. He like based it off the magician Aleister Crowley. It was so interesting, very excellently executed. Anyway, so he speaks a little bit about his experiences, and then the latter part is more his like philosophical, religious worldview. You know, his spiritual inclinations. He was more of an agnostic.
He doesn't get too into it.
No, but and there's a lot of great aphorisms here, a lot of like nice sort of pithy sayings that he comes up with, and he talks about like the craft. A lot of this is about the craft of writing. One of the things, and his like reflections about life, things that he's learned. And it was interesting. One of the things I found interesting was like, you know, we look at sort of actors and you know, like kind of like. We see them as rather narcissistic and kind of like self-absorbed.
Well, that's how the media likes to portray them, right?
Yeah, the media likes to portray them in such a way, but they also kind of give off that sense of vanity, right? There is a sense in which I found this interesting. It's like it's a different take on it, but Somerset Maugham was rather sympathetic to that attitude that they would put on this sort of like grandiose, like, you know, put the spotlight on me, darling type attitude, right? Because he says like the actor spends so many. He had a tremendous respect for actors who perfected their craft over 20, 30 years, so that by the time they were of a considerable age, they were masters of a particular character or a particular type of performance, right? He didn't really care much for those who just thought because they were beautiful that they deserved to be actors and actresses. But anyway, for those ones, he said like it's kind of like the winds of public opinion, and one moment you're flavor of the month, and the next moment you're gone. And he said like you have, for all the amount of effort and work they put into finally making it, and actually the effort they put into the craft of acting, it's like I find it a forgivable sin, let's say, of vanity while you're there, while you're in that spotlight of whatever your 15 minutes of fame, as they call it, right? And he's like, I can understand why they would need to do that to recompense for all the efforts of actually getting there, and then sitting there for only such a short time.
I can imagine back then too, where theater is, because he talks a bit about the transition from theater to film too, and so I can understand that sympathy, especially when it was predominantly theater, because there's no like, now with film we see movie stars more often, right? They're more visible. Of course, very few actually make it to the point where they're in everything, but
A-list.
I find I think in his time, especially where you're just on stage for a short period of time, it's really like that spotlight is what for that 2 hour, 3 hour presentation. If it's that, right?
Yeah. So he talks about like what it's like writing for plays, what it's like in management in the background, who you have to deal with, the divas and whoever, like you know, trying to make it their own. The director who always interferes with the writer, you know, director tries to make his own spin on a particular play or to make it their own. Anyway,
and a lot of detail about how to write a good play.
Yeah.
I felt like there's a lot of emphasis. Like I think this would be a really great read for someone who either is
considering the craft,
considering the
or
craft
in
it, or like doing small productions even,
or someone who's like a super fan. Of Somerset Maugham.
And also, like I'm a super fan, but I didn't like this very much because I think I don't really care to know about the writing. I don't really necessarily care to know as much about how he became proficient in his. Like I would want to know a little bit about that, but I also just want to know how he is as a person. And how he lived his life on a daily basis. Even it would be what I'd be more curious to know than like how he perfected the craft. So because I'm not a writer, right? So
Okay, well, personally, out of 5, I would give this a 3.5.
Yeah, I was gonna say for me a 3.
Yeah.
Even though I love him, I've never rated anything 3.
We love literally all of his work.
And there were some like great here and there, like profound messages. They just got lost in the to me in
all the other stuff that's happening.
It's not even drama. It's like tedious learnings.
Yeah. Very good. Okay.
And now I get to ask you about this one. I don't really like these kind of weird stories, so I didn't read it. But
I like my gothic stuff.
I like gothic stuff, but I don't like.
I like my weird fiction. So this one here, there's a great series if you're interested. It's very cheap. I mean, here in Canada, it's about $20. You order it from Amazon. There's the British Library.
No, I know.
And and £9.99. Yeah, so that's about right. So British Library has a whole series of these sort of like 19th century, 20th century collections of short stories. And each one is thematically arranged. So there's one I haven't read yet about railways.
Ooh,
so
like railways.
Yeah, I do like railways. So like sort of supernatural or creepy stories or ghost stories associated with railways. Yeah, so this one here is called The Nightwire and Other Tales of Weird Media. And it's kind of neat because there's a little introduction, like there's always 1 page or 2 pages that introduces the author. A lot of them are rather obscure writers. Some of them are actually quite famous, like Oliver Onions.
I don't know Oliver
So he's maybe not that, for someone who's a fan of horror or ghost stories.
I looked at me though, like I should know. Oliver Onions.
He's probably he's probably one of the more noticeable names, but I think in the mainstream he's not well known. But anyway, there's a lot of these type of these writers from the 20s and 30s and 50s and even like late 19th century, and they do like a little introductory thing of where they were born, some interesting things that they've written in the past, and also what type of technology that they were referring to, like the stenograph or the X-ray machine or the telephone, and then the story proceeds in terms of like, are you making fun of me?
No, I'm not. I just in my head I was just thinking like, so if you're into engineering and creepiness, put the two together.
Yeah, it's like a weird.
It's like
combo.
History of engineering.
It's very niche. Very niche if you're into that. Lovecraft. There's also Lovecraft one in here.
Okay, I like Lovecraft though. So, see, I don't hate all the weird things.
Okay, so The Nightwire is actually to me personally, one of the creepiest stories in this collection, and I just love it. Like I love it. Evokes such a cosmic horror element. Let me if you indulge me a moment. Indulge me. It's like set in 1926, 28, and it's sort of 2 telegraph wire operators, and so they're in the West Coast, in like a big city downtown somewhere in a high rise, and it's nighttime and it's night shift and it's cozy, right? There's that cozy aspect to it, right? And so one of the guys is like super talented. He's able to have 2 different typewriters, and he's able to get 2 different messages and type out 2 different notes, right? Exactly like that. And so what happens is they end up getting a sort of signal from like some sort of dispatch from a place called Zevico with an X. And that place doesn't really exist. So they check the maps and no such place exists. But there's reports that like the parish priest actually like goes to City Hall and announces that like there was a fog that kind of like arose from the local cemetery in Zevico, and it started to rise up into the sky and start to spread. And as it's spreading, it's bringing like a sense of like weird lights are in it, and it's strange sort of phenomenon. And you know, there's screams accompanied by it, like in the mist, and you just don't know what's happening in the fog. And so they get like intermittent dispatches, and the guy's like, you know, frantically, typing, but not really quite not saying anything, not responding to the narrator, right? And so anyway, the fog slowly is approaching, and then they look like the narrator like kind of like looks out the window and he sees the fog is like rolling into the city, and their screams are coming closer and closer from all the people down in the like ground level. And then he like turns to his friend and he realizes his friend's dead. He's slumped over, and the guy who was dispatching was actually dead, and he'd been dead for some time actually. So there's like it's really 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 creepy, but it gives you like a nice like like to be working, kind of like just a random reflection. It kind of like makes me wish like even in offices like we work more with like older technology, like not so much screens, but like things that are mechanical.
Yeah, I do like the
clicky
sound of
clacking.
clicky clacky typewriters. That's why I'm doing this, because I'm imagining in my head the like sounds it's making.
And it sounds weird, but like I sometimes you watch those like 1950s or 40s like detective things, and it's like it'd be so cool to have an office where there's actually papers, and you can carry papers, put it in a folder, rather than everything being emailed all the time. You know, there's like something like tactile that's like satisfying to be able to have something be like, job well done, boom. Like, John, you're staying late tonight, and he just like puts a bunch of paperwork on your desk as opposed to like 60 emails in your inbox.
Yeah, secretly I read the newspaper, like an actual physical
it's
newspaper,
kind of,
because I like the sound and the smell and the
there's a
like
whole experience to
holding
it.
searching through it. I don't know, it's
I
so
think-
much better than on the internet.
I think there's
Anyone else agree?
I think there's a lot we miss when we move into like digital technology.
Yeah.
Things that we don't even know we miss. Anyway, I would give this a 4 out of 5. Not everything is scary in this. Sometimes it's pretty erratic. The writing, I don't know. There's a sense of like a little bit Pulp Fiction-y aspects to it here.
The one you read to me was still like a fun story. Slightly creepy. Enjoyable.
Well, anyway, stay warm in February. We hope you have a pleasant month, and we look forward to bringing you some more books.
Yes.
We're reading, if you want to read along, we're reading The Demons.
Yeah, so it'll probably be like, honestly, 3 weeks. So
We'll see if
read it.
Yeah.
And then we'll touch base and see what you think of it.
Let's do that. Yeah. Okay, well, have a good evening. You take care for now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.